want to get loose and then try and make a correction. You've got to get stiffness. You got to pull the slack out of the spring so that part of the body engages and you can move it back and correct it.
Yep.
Stiff, 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 brother.
Yep.
And that will give you the most injury resilience and the highest performance to realign that line of drive through the joint or wherever it is you're starting to lose it.
Yep. What is going on? Brian Carroll here, PowerX Strength HQ, Training Center, Clinic. We just kind of figured out what we call this thing going forward. Here with my good friend, co-author, the Stuart McGill, the Dr. McGill, as many of you know. We're gonna have a discussion today about some things that I've heard from people over the years. People say, well, have you ever talked to Stu about this? Or have you ever thought about this? Or doing this with Dr. McGill? And some of these things are kind of requested things over the years, but these are some of the things that I'm actually curious myself about. So I'm gonna kind of segue into our next question. And this one is about rotational, bending, extending ab or core work for the powerlifter. I have a lot of people maybe see what I program for people and they ask, how come you took out the reverse hypers for me? Or how come you took out the twists or the bending, the cable crunches, the rope crunches? And I'll tell them that, well, you're a powerlifter, and to build your squat and your deadlift, you need to be able to build stiffness and super stiffness and not stress the disc unnecessarily with the repetitive bending. But sometimes people will come back and say, well, shouldn't you be strong in every plane of movement? Shouldn't you be strong in flexion and extension and rotation? And so I have my thoughts on that, but I haven't heard you necessarily, I'm sure you have answered the question, but how do you answer that question when a powerlifter says, how come, Stu, how come you don't want me doing rotational work or crunching work as a powerlifter? How come there's better exercises suited for me?
I'm going to answer it with several supporting points, and I'm going to give you some counter arguments as well to challenge myself on this, because as we both realize, there's not one approach that's going to help everybody.
Right.
So let me start this off with a powerlifter on the athletic spectrum is somewhat unidimensional. I'm not asking you to throw a football, a bullet for 70 yards. I'm not asking you to run 10K like a triathlete. In fact, the better the powerlifter you are, the more stiffened your frame has become to bear enormous loads and get the thrust lines down through the linkage to the floor without falling over and buckling joints. So the rod of the spine is a flexible rod. That's fabulous. It allows me to tie my shoe. It allows me to procreate humankind.
Yeah.
It allows me to do all of these helpful things. What engineer would take a flexible rod like a garden hose and then put 1,000 pounds on it? You know what's going to happen. We were the first that I know of to actually film and document an injury in powerlifting. This was in the late 1980s. I was working with my PhD student at the time, Jacek Holovitsky, who had the Canadian record in powerlifting. He was no slouch, and he was an engineer as well. Really outstanding individual. And we filmed this person who was descending into the squat with video fluoroscopy. We watched all the vertebrae moving, and then just at one segment, it buckled. His spine buckled. So that was the first time we ever saw a powerlifting injury occur. It was a loss of stiffness. So that word stiffness is a good thing. As a powerlifter, you enhance your stiffness by putting on an exosuit, adding even more stiffness.
Right.
Knee wraps, elbow wraps, it's all to add more stiffness to allow your skeleton to bear a load. Can you throw a football wearing an exoskeleton of stiffness? No, you can't. So that's the unidimensionality of the powerlifting sport requirement. So that's the beginning of the story. Now let's look at the categories of joints. It's no coincidence that the torso has a ball and socket at the top end, the shoulder, and a ball and socket, the hip, at the bottom end of the torso. They are designed to create power through a big range of motion. Ball and socket, that's what they do. Really hard to injure them, actually, doing that, unless you hit the very, very end range. A disc is not a ball and socket joint. A disc falls into the category of being an adaptable fabric. A fabric. My shirt is a man-made, non-adaptable fabric, and I'm going to create stress-strain reversals on my shirt, back and forth like this. And if I keep doing that, I will create a delamination in the fibers. So motion delaminates the fibers. It's exactly what I measured in thousands of discs over the years.
So I hope you're enjoying this video. I want to talk to you really quick about our CBD line. PowerX Strength CBD is 100% THC free, made with MCT oil and CBD isolate extracted from hemp. We have sublingual drops that taste good, made with MCT oil, not cheap hemp oil that upsets your stomach. These bombs, these drops, and these products are 100% THC free. You will not fail a drug test, and we have testing on the website. Our bombs you want to use 2 to 3 times a day in a localized area to reduce pain and inflammation. This stuff works wonders for tight muscles and joints. Then lastly, we have a product called CryoFreeze, which is similar to a BioFreeze. It has 1,000 milligrams of CBD isolate mixed with a nice cooling formula that will help you reduce pain and inflammation. So thank you so much for the support. The link's below. Use the special discount code, and I'll see you soon. Back to the video.
Every one of my colleagues around the world who did this kind of work agrees. Motion is okay. I can do on all fours, cat and camels. You won't really change the disc that much. But if you put load on it and then move it back and forth, now I can get a slosh pipe. Boom, boom, boom. I will get strong for 3 months. But after 3 months of doing this, of course, I've got twisting strength enhanced, no question. We've done the experiments. But then the collagen fibers now will start to delaminate. Now, the collagen fibers forming the layers of the disc are held together by a ground substance. It's kind of a gooey material, think of that. The more viscous the gooey material, the more mobility you can have in your spine. The more viscous the gooey substance, because you're holding a gel inside the nucleus around all those collagen fibers, if they start to get loose and delaminate now, you will find a weak spot where the gel can start to seep through, because the pressure inside the nucleus, it's like a chemical explosion. It's enormous pressures inside a disc. With more movement, you will work a track for the gel to come through, forming a disc bulge. Not a good thing for a power lifter. So there's a little bit of a story why, if you can do it without a lot of motion, you're better off. But here are some of the counterpoints. We will see some powerlifting athletes who do a little bit of twisting and whatnot. I don't know any who do sit-ups. Right. I've been on the strongman tour. I don't know one who does sit-ups. That's just too extreme of a delamination process, and it doesn't end well to then go and do a deadlift or a squat or something like that. But having said that, there is a spectrum of collagen types in the human population. Type 1, type 2 collagen. One of them is more resistance to motion. So you can roll the dice now and hope that that's not you, and you'll get away with it, and some do. You know, we would look at that Latvian lifter, Constantino Constantine. Now, he didn't do well with his spine in the end. And people would argue and say, oh, you know, he pulls with the dive and the full flexion. Well, he did. But I would bet dollars to donuts that he had, actually a donut costs a lot more. That wouldn't be a good bet, but you know what I mean.
Nope.
That's an old expression, I guess. But I would make a large bet he had that end of the spectrum, like you with your neurology. You're the end of the human gene pool, and he got away with it. Could I get away with it? Could you get away with it? I would bet strongly in the other way. So there's a little bit of a counter argument, and why there's always a human exception. The last counterpoint that I hear from some coaches and lifters is, well, when you're under 1,000 pounds and you make a line of a thrust line error and you've got to correct that, it's nice to have a little bit of mobility in your back. But think of every time you've been under 1,000 and you make a mistake and you correct it with your back, that's when the injury occurred. The injury occurs when you get out of alignment and you have to correct it. So we spend, as you know, a lot of time enhancing the power lifter's ability to correct those line of drive errors, even if it's only a few millimeters. We will start to be a leaning tower through the ankles. You know, athletic feet are big. Grip the ground. Make a biggest foot as you possibly can. More toe push and you corrected it. Or move the hips ever so slightly. Best strategy is the hips. Then the knees, then the ankles. The last strategy you want to be when you're crushed under 1,000 pounds is to do that with your back, as you know. So that's the beginning of my answer to that. It's not an easy, it's a large academic discussion, and I can go into studies after study if you wish on that. But there's a start that probably interviewers and podcasters aren't used, so they don't ask me those kinds of questions.
No, that's a
great question.
Well, it's a good answer, because that's one of the rebuttals I hear is about, what if I'm losing a deadlift and pitch forward? What if I'm losing a squat and pitch forward? And you made the analogy before about a tire being a little deflated, like a disc. Well, what came into my mind just now when you were talking about that is, when you're saying, why would you want more mobility when you're losing a lift? That doesn't make any sense. I'm thinking it's the same thing as a car driving down the expressway and it loses its traction on the expressway and it's trying to correct itself. It's the same as trying to correct the car but letting some air out of the tire at the same time. It doesn't really make sense to me. Why you would want, how that would make it any better. It's almost as if a car is trying to gain its bearings again. You let the air out of the tires, it's not going to help you at all. It's actually the opposite of what you want. You want that tire rigid. You want to be able, your best chance to be able to correct it with rigidness.
Yeah, well, if I can use just a little bit of bioengineering and a little bit of neuroscience, you're exactly right. But to use their terms, the body controls motion with stiffness. So I can stand and hover my ears over my shoulders over my hips. In other words, stack my center of masses over my base of support. Then I can shut down all my muscles and I won't fall down. Am I standing with muscle contraction force? No, I am using stiffness. So when a muscle contracts, I wish I could do this with your arm, mine's a bit puny, but when a muscle contracts, it creates force, but it also creates stiffness. Now, a lot of force, I can't move. That's why athletes have to boom, boom, use pulsing forces. So the body controls motion with stiffness. Now, if I can go back to your analogy, you let a little air out of your car tire, it bulges on the road, and now it's lost stiffness and turgor are the two hydraulic and it's called engineering dynamics terms, which is dynamic stiffness. So now the car is a bit sloppy on the road. You apply a corrective strategy, but it's lost in the elasticity of the tire and the loss of turgor. So you can't correct it. So if you want to get loose and then try and make a correction, you've got to get stiffness. You got to pull the slack out of the spring so that part of the body engages and you can move it back and correct it. Stiff, 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 brother. And that will give you the most injury resilience and the highest performance to realign that line of drive through the joint or wherever it is you're starting to lose it.
That's
so
good.
You want to be stiff, and we all travel in the same circle, and you hear the great ones say the same thing over and over again. So, when I get to work with a guy like you or, our good friend Ed Cohn, listen to the coaching cues. They're not talking about doing twists and bendy twisties to get ready under the bar. They are talking about getting into the lifter's wedge and wiggling into the lifter's wedge, not to have mobility, but to pull all the slack out. Make themselves stiff, so when they engage, the final engagement is just squeezing the bar. They've already got the bar broken and it's moving off the ground. It's fabulous. So again, I can keep going circle upon circle on this one, but I don't hear too many of the elites arguing for more training of rotation. If you train I'll give you one more example on this, because we were talking yesterday. We had a young lad who wanted to challenge the military, special force military tests of speed sit-ups and whatnot. We've done these experiments. It's a problem for a lot of young soldiers training speed sit-ups to pass the elite level test. That will prevent them from advancing in their career. So the strategy we take, and there's been very few failures. They don't train the test. We get them to do the statics, like heavy planks. You know, Pavel, our good friend Pavel Satsulin, the hard style plank. That is much more tolerable in terms of the adaptable fabric that you need, because you also have to carry the trap bar deadlift in some of those military tests as well. So speed sit-ups doesn't go very well with that as a confusing of the adaptive system. So we will have them do heavy isometrics. They don't have any back pain, then they go challenge the speed sit-up test and they smash it. They do higher scores on the speed sit-up test without even training it, but we did it through isometric abdominal work, not repeated. So there you go. There's a proof of principle of the transfer of athleticism from some of those isometric techniques into passing a speed sit-up.
Thank you so much for watching today. Please subscribe, like, and share if you enjoyed this video, and have a wonderful day.